released on vinyl and vision.
Hey folks, thanks for tuning into the latest episode of Vinyl and Vision. Here we are with episode 91 in the new year 2023. Happy New Year to you all. I know I'm already in the middle of the month, so it's kind of late for Happy New Year's, but it's the first one of ours for the new year, and tonight's very special guest is Bobby Matador. Bobby Matador is the singer, songwriter, pianist, bassist for the band Oneida. Oneida's latest record, simply entitled Success, is a wonderful album released on Joyful Noise. Don't remember the exact release date. I believe it was around June or July of 2022. So it's been out for a little while now. But it's a wonderful record. It really, really is. I mean, I listened to it immediately, and it immediately grabbed me, and I knew that this was a amazing record. So I went to see Oneida play in Cambridge recently in December, and it was wonderful. It was a great show. I was very lucky to get in, actually. It was actually a miracle that I got in, to tell you the truth. I can tell you that story at another date. But they were an amazing band. They are an amazing band. And I'm looking forward to seeing what they do in the not-too-distant future. I talked with Bobby about that briefly near the end of the show as far as like what they have planned coming up for this year. There is some European tour dates in March, a couple one-offs in April, and possibly recording another album very soon. Also, topic of discussion is the album that Bobby chose for tonight, The Fall's Domesday Payoff Triad Plus, which was difficult and confusing. So, am I covering that record? I guess not, because I didn't know I couldn't find it. So if anyone is familiar with the Fall's discography, I think this happens on a number of occasions with their records, where they get reissued or they get released in different countries and they change the record for the most part. And so that's kind of what happened here. The Domesday Payoff Triad Plus is the American version of what would have been Bend Sinister. So my mistake, I mean, I knew there was different listings, but I just didn't know which one is the one Bobby has, which one is the one he's referencing to. So I was thinking, well, if Bend Sinister is close enough to what the Domesday Payoff was in the American release, then maybe I'll just focus on this and they're going to sync up somehow. It kind of did, kind of didn't. It fell off a little bit, but it was a great conversation nonetheless. Bobby is a wonderfully profound, thoughtful person. It's no surprise that he is an educator, because I got that from him speaking with him. I knew it I knew it beforehand, prior, going into the conversation. But very eloquent, very well spoken, very methodical in his thought. And his perception, his takes on this record, the songs in the record itself, and his personal experience with it, I find to be profound. It was just a great conversation. Some of the insights for some of these songs I really, really do like. Kind of having him provide his own perspective on what these songs mean to him, because a lot of these songs have so much interpretation based on the fans, the people that love this music, and there's a lot of information out there as far as band fans' participation in experiencing and exploring the possibilities of these songs. So Bobby's are his own, and I think that he cherishes them in his own way, in a personal way. But it's just nice to have him share those here, I think. So thank you for joining me in this conversation. Here at Vinyl and Vision simply ask that you guys do all the things you do with the internet. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, rate, review the show if you like it. And if you care to support us in a financial way, you can always visit our website, psychicstatic.net. And any purchase you make there helps go towards funding the show. So, without further ado, folks, enjoy. Yeah, but it's great to have you joining me this morning. Thank you for carving out some time for me.
My pleasure.
So I guess the place to start is kind of like at the very beginning, like your history in music, like as a kid, like what was music like in the house?
Oh man. Yeah, well, interestingly, my family's not like extremely musical, but my parents had records. My mom's big classical music listener and lover, and then my dad had like his, collections of things from the mid and late 60s and early 70s, and so I like did my homework, as an elementary school student, putting on my dad's records or listening to the radio or whatever, but there wasn't like a specific hook. Neither of my parents are musicians or anything.
Hmm.
And I don't know how it got started when I was a kid. It was like taking childhood piano lessons for a few years. And interestingly, they didn't really take, like, I never really enjoyed the process of formal piano lessons. I understood the notation system, but it didn't really speak to me or land really hard. But I guess the formative motivator is the act of sitting at a piano. And this is still absolutely true to me. The act of sitting at a piano and playing has a really strong pull for me. And there's something about the way that the sound kind of envelops you and comes out of both sides into both ears. And, you got both your hands on either side of you sort of involved and your body involved. I think it's probably pretty similar for people whose introduction has been playing the drums, right? It's like a
Sure.
holistic and sort of enveloping sound environment. And that like totally stuck with me. So, a few years of piano lessons, and then as soon as I was like, I don't want to do this anymore in whatever fifth grade or sixth grade, I don't remember. I think the sensation of being like wrapped up and enveloped in that sound that I was controlling,
Hmm.
um, I think that probably lasted. I can still sense that and still feel that. So that'd be like the genesis of it. And then I kind of came back, right? It was like I started in eighth grade playing in a band with a couple friends, and it gave us something to do before school, and it gave us a way to be sure of ourselves that like we had, middle school dances, and that was like not really my social milieu of preference. But then it was like, hey, but if we're playing at the dance, like that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, way better.
Yeah, so playing cover songs and things, and a kind of lifelong commitment to DIY processes was born at that point. We myself and my middle school band friends made a tape. We had a very supportive teacher who was my seventh grade history teacher, who was also a drummer and a musician and a guitarist, and had a studio in his home. And he was like, hey man, if you guys want to record, come to my house. I've got a tape machine and
Hmm. Oh,
mics. And he helped us record. And it was like, oh yeah, you could just do this.
yeah.
And so that sort of piled on. And at that point, so I guess whatever that is, eighth grade, I was 13 in eighth grade. From that point on, it was like, okay, who am I playing with and what are we playing? So then you know, in high school, it was like, I guess I should try writing songs. And,
Yeah. Right.
that's when that started. But then, yeah, then it's just a matter of following a course of evolution and exploration, and,
Yeah.
all the random factors that drop into your life
Right.
coming.
And with that being said, I mean, one of the big things and what I kind of like to discuss is the idea of influence or inspiration. I don't know. Like I feel like the two words could kind of be kind of considered differently,
Sure.
but
Yeah, I think so.
like where do you find that like when you're developing from eighth grade on, let's say, like what are you taking in and how is that kind of like coming out of you?
I think for me, and I think this is probably like very, very translatable to a lot of people. I don't think this is like some dynamite insight,
Hmm.
but I think it's really up to just the confluence of factors of, for me at least, like what I was exposed to.
Yeah.
And especially things that made me think and hear differently, like anything that kind of knocked my perceptions or preconceptions a little bit askew. So for instance, I mentioned my dad's records, right? My dad's record collection.
Yeah.
That was pretty sort of standard, normal,
Middle-aged man,
range of
American.
stuff. Yeah, right. And so to place you in time here, I'm like pre-adolescent and adolescent in the 80s. And my dad, born in the, early baby boom. So he's like coming of age late 60s. So it's like he's got Santana records. He's got the Guys and Dolls soundtrack. He's got a Chicago album. It's like
Yeah.
it's sort of the norm. Um
Sure.
but like I can say, like I can remember one of the records that kind of threw me for a loop was he had Bob Dylan, The Times They Are a Changin'. Not a
Mm.
not a record that's like widely celebrated as important Dylan, right? Um but that record just didn't sound good to me in a way that, good in quotes, right? It's like,
Yeah.
here's this guy. I was like, oh, I was culturally aware. Bob Dylan, important 60s guy. That was kind of it, right?
Yeah.
So then it's like, put this record on, and it's just gruff and rough and whiny and drony, and I was like, it was not easy for me to take that in whenever, I don't know what this is, again, like sixth grade or something, but I kept coming back to it. It was like, really, like this is allowed? It
Yeah.
was sort of those moments. And I remember not all, but I remember so many of those moments being like, wait, stuff sounds like this. It was like I bought at that time with my money, I bought, whatever, like Bruce Springsteen, Duran Duran. I'm thinking these are literal purchases of mine. I can think back
Sure.
to
Yeah.
Paul Simon, the big Graceland, right?
Okay.
Like these are all things that to me like sounded normal and good. And then I would get
Yeah.
exposed to things that I was like, what? Like that's not good. And then it would be like, but I keep listening to it. And I think that process of like being slightly dislocated, like bumped off of my, of my wherever I was standing or sitting a little bit and having to readjust that those things just kind of built and combined into and pushed me into where I am. So yeah, influence, inspiration. I think of it probably just all as sort of history, because it's like how much of it was intentional, how much of it was purely lucky.
Right. But then
I,
there's a factor in there that where like kind of you expose yourself to a certain amount of stuff. Like when does it change for you where like, a bunch of the things that you mentioned now, like going through your father's collection and then even the things that you were purchasing yourself at that time, Bruce Springsteen, Duran Duran, where does it start getting weird?
yeah. Yeah, so the first place it started getting weird, I have an older brother, he's a couple years older than me, and his friend Ben gave him a copy of the Trio album, Trio and Error. Trio is like a German kind of new wave poppy
Yeah.
minimalist group. They had this, you might know the song Da Da Da.
Yeah,
um,
that sounds vaguely familiar.
yeah, it's like early 80s. So this is probably 82, 83. And yeah, so my brother has this record that's genuinely like odd but also catchy. Some of it's in English, some of it's in German. I can remember that record as being a like, oh yeah, like things are just different. Like I said, the Dylan record, like this can this is gonna push you to hear things differently.
Right.
But like weird. I think it was I've just
Well, like when did you develop your taste?
yeah, I think like starting super super early, being made to play like Bartok pieces on the piano, right? Like
Uh,
those
yeah.
are like in whatever fourth or fifth grade, right? Rather than for release or something. I had a cool piano teacher. Um it's just these little like accretions of stuff. And then when you invited me, you were like, okay, let's pick a record, right? An album that had
Sure.
specific impact. And I hemmed and hawed, as I'm sure anyone would when presented with that idea.
It's a
And
hard
I ended up
question.
picking this fall record, the Domesday Payoff. And I'm a huge fan of the fall.
Okay.
And this is not like this is not a hyper canonical record. If anything, it's a little bit odd because it's like an American version of a quote unquote real album. It's like, hey, let's take the singles and pile them into this record and push out some of the weirder, murkier stuff, and then we'll release it in the US. And but like I bought that record for specific reasons that I remember, and I remember the process of buying it, and I remember really well the process being like that. It fit into an experience, like a transformational process that was already familiar to me. Like, this doesn't sound good.
Yeah.
This doesn't sound right, but it's like I don't want to stop listening to it. And
Yeah.
then the more I listened and the more I learned and the more I followed threads and branches, spinning out from that, um, that becomes like a very, very, very important hub of connections for me in the music that I like all the
Yeah.
paths. That record had a ton of paths for
Yeah,
me.
I bet it did. I mean, like The Fall is one of those bands that as soon as you find them and as soon as you start digging into it, and like it, because if you don't like it, then you're not gonna obviously go down that path. But there's so much there. There's so much to mine, and I have to ask you about this album first. So
Yeah, yeah.
first of all, you said that you wanted to choose the album, the Domesday Payoff, which when I looked it up, I couldn't find it specifically. Like it's connected to Bend Sinister.
Yeah, it's the American version of Bend Sinister.
Okay, but so is
So
it the same track listing? Because some track listings vary depending on what.
yeah, it's different. What it is it's like and this is funny because this is like such a classic. This is like a the Beatles in the 60s thing, right? It's like The
Yeah.
Fall is a big deal in England, not at all a big deal in the US at this time, the 80s, the mid 80s.
Right.
And it's Bend Sinister as such was not released in the States, right? It's like, here's the new Fall album, and I don't know what label they were on in
Beggar's
the
Banquet, I
UK.
think.
Yeah. So this record is on Big Time Records.
All
Um
right.
and
Okay.
it's like they took a couple of the 12 inches because this is at a period when the Fall's releasing a bunch of singles, and the way they were releasing singles was in these 12 inches with like, here's your A side, here's a little something extra on the A side, and here's a couple songs on the B side.
Mhm.
And they just took a few of these singles and were like, well, these need to be on the US version of this record. And so then what are we going to bump off? Because this is not CD era. So
Right.
they bumped a few of the Ben Sinister songs off, and they put on like, there's a Ghost in My House and Hey Luciani, which are these singles. So the way the record is presented, the subtitle, it's the Domesday Payoff Triad Plus exclamation point,
Right.
and it
Okay.
has these 3 single covers on the front. So you can look at it as like, oh, it's kind of a compilation. It's like most of Ben Sinister plus the singles from that year.
Oh,
And
okay.
it's the release date is 87.
Okay.
And I know exactly when I bought it because it was the start of my sophomore year in high school. So it was actually the fall of 1988 that I bought it. I had just turned 15,
Hmm.
and it was in the cutout bin of this record store, Pitchfork Records in Concord, New Hampshire. Right? See, I told you I remember this. This is why I was like, I'm doing this record.
Okay.
Um,
Cool.
and I had gone off to high school with some music from my older brother, who was at that time in a long-term hospitalization. And he had recorded some of his records onto tape for me, right? He
Mhm.
taped some stuff for me between freshman and sophomore year of high school for me. And that was like Sonic Youth, Evol, and Sister, both of whom Sister was the record that had like just recently come out. And the Bevis Frond and Dinosaur, You're Living All Over Me. No,
Oh,
Bug, the Dinosaur album
okay.
Bug had just come out. So he was kind of like exposing me to this world of, what we now look back at as a pretty like well codified indie rock canon,
Yeah. The
Um,
beginnings of it, really, of an indie
yeah.
release.
Yeah. And so I was like just the particular age where like I knew about hardcore and I had friends who were into hardcore, but it didn't really speak to me because by the time I got around listening to that stuff, whatever, it just wasn't like resonating with me. So this would be that kind of post hardcore and sort of psychedelia stuff all
Hmm.
mashed in. And so I kind of knew about the Fall, but I'd never heard them. It was like, I'm sure I'd read some stuff. I was not an avid consumer of like super hip underground zines, but I don't know, maybe Spin Magazine mentioned the Fall or something like that.
Yeah.
So I'm in this record store and I see this record and it's, it's $4 or whatever, whatever it was in the cutout bin, 4.79. And I was like, oh, cool, I'll buy this. Right. I had a little money. I knew about this band and I was in this mindset of like, oh yeah, there's like all this new music and this band is one of those bands, right? That's as deep as my thinking was at that time. And then, I listened to it and I just had that. I had what by then I guess was becoming a familiar reaction, which was like, this is not immediately palatable.
Right.
But okay. Right. I'll see what it has to offer me and how it opens up for me, because I was finding a lot of comfort in that process. Like sort of a time in my life when I was like, I don't necessarily think in all the same ways as everybody. And I had I was kind of figuring out that I was probably done playing football, which is a big part of my life and my identity, and like junior high and like, but basically from 5th grade through 10th grade, like the two things that were most important to me in life were music and football. And this was a point at which I was like, my music friends are generally cooler than my football friends and seem a little more accepting of some quirks. And that is not fair as a blanket statement, to be clear. That's, I'm overgeneralizing, but I think I was kind of finding myself pulled in that direction. So it was like, all right, so what is this? And it's, as with so much Fall stuff, there's so much that's inscrutable. And because this was like a US cheapy issue, there's like no useful liner notes. There's nothing to give you any info.
Right. And you have your copy.
The record. What's that?
You have your copy, your original copy that you bought?
Yes, I do.
You can carry your stuff too, it looks like.
Yeah. Oh, and so I'm holding it up to the camera here. I know you're recording this in audio, but I'm holding it up to the camera, and you at least can see, James, that the back of the record, there's no inner sleeve or anything. The back of the record has the song titles. It has pictures of 4 of the band members, not Marky Smith. Right. And the front cover is this like deliberately dislocated collaged version of 3 singles that are compiled in the record. Right. And that's the package and that's the info. And it's like, okay, here's what you have. So like there's nothing on here that's like Mr. Pharmacist, classic 60s garage nugget, There's a ghost in my house. Like I didn't know R. Dean Taylor. Like I didn't know like, oh, like white Canadian Motown guy making like strange garage music. Like none of that was available to me as information at this time. It was more just like, here's this music, what do you think? And I'm like, this is mysterious and weird and totally inscrutable, and this dude is babbling, but I kind of want to keep hearing what he's saying, and I think I can figure out who he is. And then one thing, and I literally had to go look this up to see if my memory was correct, and it is correct. The song Terry Waite Says on here, which is a total like Brix Smith like catchy, like neo mod moment. I was like, this record was released before Terry Waite was kidnapped and imprisoned, but by the time I bought this record, he was he was like known. It was like, oh, this dude who's being held hostage in the Middle East. And I was like somewhat aware of that. I was interested in politics in the world. And, it was like, so what is this song about? And it's like fun. It's funny. You go back and it's like classically like Marky Smith, completely personalized, inscrutable, like collaged lyrics. It's like so personal.
Right. And this weird, like prolific, prophetic almost stance that he has, like oddly enough.
Yeah, like it's so interesting that and then of course he, like, as I began to learn more about the Fall and about him through the next couple of years, it was like, oh, he's also a deliberate misleader. He'd say things about his music that were like demonstrably not true, like on purpose. And that I found once I started figuring this out, I was like, oh right, this guy makes this music and he creates this universe, and like it's available to anyone, but it
Yeah.
for a lot of people it's not comfortable. And
Yeah.
I've found myself being really comfortable in that world, right? And then it's as I learned more about the music, I think this record was my exposure to like, you know, quote unquote 60s garage. I think the song Mr. Pharmacist, I was like, this song is fucking amazing.
Mm.
Like it makes me feel rock and roll, you know?
Right.
And then it was like, you know, probably in the next year or two, it was like, oh yeah, that's not really the Fall, right? That's someone else's song. And I'm like, what? I have to reckon with this. And then it was like, takes me down that path, you know? And I'm like, oh my
Right.
God, there's this whole world of music that this record sent me down. You know, it was
Yeah, it
like,
opened you up to.
yeah, it
Right.
was like, I have to learn about this. What is this nuggets thing that people talk about, right? And so, given my age,
Yeah.
that record is like a big touchstone because, like, how are you going to find this music? Well, somebody awesome had to compile it and
Yeah.
make it available. You know, I wasn't like a record collector. I was buying records as fast as I could, but
Yeah, sure. As a kid,
collectible ones.
teenager,
Yeah.
how much you're going to really get? Especially, see, for me as a teen, I didn't really have a very good musical education. You know, I mean, like I was starting to get into things, but didn't really have anyone to guide me too well into the indie scene or punk scene or any of the underground stuff. So you kind of have a little leg up on me in that sense. I didn't get into the
Yeah.
Fall until I was 24, maybe.
But there must have been things that you did get into, right? That just happened to you that like
Yeah.
guided you in your particular. I feel the same way. I feel like, okay, I have my older brother was a little bit of a curator for me, right?
Hmm.
Um, but then there were all these other things that just like fell into my lap, and it was basically like creating an exploratory mindset. So, and
Yeah.
it was actually in high school that I became friends and bandmates with John from Oneida,
Right.
and we started playing together in high school. And he has the exact same mindset. We don't have we didn't have the exact same tastes in school. Like I was coming more from and for me, it wasn't like this is indie rock. Like I was also like, oh, there's also like alternative music. Oh my God, the Smiths and New Order and the Cure landed like just right for me in ninth and 10th grade too, right? Much more sort of
Right.
mainstream accessible versions of maybe a similar approach.
Right.
And then it was like learning that you could look back. I remember us talking about this kid and me talking about Can we were both exposed to for the first time in high school.
Okay.
And we're like, this isn't, how could this be? How could there be this band that like not everybody knows about? Like, but it sounds like this. It was like, of course, like it seemed almost implausible because we didn't really have a sense of the scope of how much music was out there, and
Mm.
also how like the canonization process is so fraught and artificial and you know fucks up people's understanding of things, right? And I feel
Yeah.
this now, like I'm a history teacher as well as an English teacher, and like the the desire of people to impose narrative is understandable,
Hmm.
but also so unbelievably misleading.
Yeah. Well, for
Like,
the music biz too, so specifically, like I've been kind of like grappling that with that myself because I'm like why do some bands end up being able to succeed and like kind of get all this press and and notoriety when others just completely go under the radar for their entire lives, their entire careers.
right. And it's
It's just
interesting
weird.
because we've been in an era recently, for better and for worse combined, of going back and digging stuff up and recanonizing or reordering the canon, which I think is a good process, right? I think the
Mm,
investigatory
sure.
process is amazing, right? That
Right.
like uncovering things, reissuing things. But like because we're human, there's still, instead of a just like, oh my God, there's a terrifying multiplicity that we have to grapple with in our own personal ways. It's like, no, the actual story is now this, right?
Mm,
Or like, actually, this is better and this influenced this. And it's good to get the alternate stories out there, but it's also it's ultimately liberating to be like, oh, there isn't a story. There's like
yeah.
an ocean and you're floating in it, and what you see and where you go defines who you are, and it's like amazing to make connections,
Mm,
people. But I'm like I'm I agree with you. It's odd and occasionally frustrating to be like, wait, what's the narrative and why am I not in it in a different place? Or why is this band not more popular? Like, why do people like this? Is
Hmm.
frustrating, but it's kind of dead endy.
Yeah, yeah. Now, no, I think that this album that you chose today is a kind of a good example of that. First of all, I think that it's fair to say that they were fairly underrated throughout their entire career. I mean, obviously there are the people that admire them and love them to no end, almost to a fault, and then there are some who just can't get it and they don't bother with it. I found this album particularly difficult. There is a lot of information about it. Like I actually found this website, which is amazing. It's obviously some fan generated thing, but it's just like they break down every song, like again, to a fault because it's just like too much information. It's like, okay,
Is
you
this
guys,
is this the annotated fall
yeah,
website? Yeah, I mean
yeah,
it's worth putting a shout out there for people because if you get into the music, that is a fun place to go. But right, so like as a person who has loved this band for decades, I almost never
sure,
go look at that because I've found that like I need my own personal I never want to read like what other people think about, for instance, the narrative voice of like Hip Priest, for
hmm,
instance, like big fall song from Hex Induction Hour that everybody like or whatever that is much better known than most of the stuff on the record we're talking about. Like
yeah,
I don't ever want to know like where those images and languages supposedly came from or how others connect them. I want that song. Like
your own
I want
personal, yeah.
yeah, and I want the Marquis Smith that like I want. Which I don't think it's far off from like, probably his own conception of himself, but like I don't
Hmm.
I don't need things fully explained. But on the other hand, I love the passion and the energy and commitment that goes into that. Right. I'm not like talking down. I think that site is amazing. And I
Yeah,
think that people are like, I'm kind of curious about the fall. Like, totally go like check out the annotated fall site. It's
right.
incredible.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I mean fans are great. It's great to have
yeah,
fans. It's great that people love them so much that they want to spend time in researching and doing this stuff. So yeah, no discredit to them at all. But I understand you're wanting to kind of hold on to your own personal kind of understanding of what this music is like because I think that's kind of what our relationship with music is typically like. Before the internet, I mean, that's all we had. So you, as a young fan of the Fall, growing up, kind of pre-internet, essentially,
oh
you didn't have that ability to get any research on them. I mean, like I could barely find anything about them now, and I do have the internet.
yeah.
So back in the '80s, I can only imagine that there was nothing. So
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
or there were what there was there was it was
fanzines
like,
and
okay, I need
stuff.
to learn more about this record, so and this band, so I went back and bought This Nation's Saving Grace, which had just
Oh,
come out a couple years before. And
right.
like, if you were, realistically, if you're looking for favorite fall records for me, as opposed to like the what is the kind of the hub and connector, that one's probably there. That one and Hex Induction Hour and
That
some of
one's
the
my
early
favorite.
singles, and then the later stuff, the Unutterable, is like to me just an impossibly amazing record from a band that had been around 25 years, or whatever.
Hmm.
um but yeah, like you had to kind of move backwards and forwards simultaneously at a pace that you couldn't dictate in terms of learning about stuff. You had to find people who knew this. And the you know, I record stores, man, like I still believe that the cultural value of record stores and like I'll say college radio, although whatever you want to call it, community radio, left of the dial radio, like
Hmm.
those worlds were it was like okay, this is a thing, there are connections, there are people, you can go talk about this and you can go learn about this with people, as
Hmm.
opposed to like looking in magazines or whatever. And like I said, I didn't even really know about the world of like zines and little DIY publications. Like I just was not exposed to it. Like I was a suburban kid.
Right.
um
in New
Right.
Hampshire.
And had I known that, that would have been another like pillar of like, how do you find out about this stuff?
It's at the record stores. Yeah.
Yeah, go to the
It's all
record
there.
stores and talk to the people there. And yeah, like sometimes they're like weird old dudes who just want to sell you Zappa records. That's fine
They
too.
seem
Like,
a little gruff,
yeah, yeah.
but yeah, that's eventually you open up because then you mentioned that one thing that they're like, oh, you heard them? Okay, you're cool. You're a cool person. All right, I'll help you.
Yeah, well, and just yeah, like that's who knows that, who knew that stuff, right? And then it was
Right.
like going, it was much easier. Then I went off to college, and it was like, okay, there's college radio station here, and there are lots of people in bands who are playing at house parties every single weekend, and you're like, that was a quick accumulation of connections, and then everybody's sharing stuff, and that was the big explosion, right? High school was more hold on to the people that you like realize are like you and like struggle your way to learn stuff.
Right. Grab onto whatever you can, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So like again about this album, I didn't know what copy you had. So based on the research that I had and like the information that I had, I kind of just essentially did the rundown of Bend Sinister because like all the new repressings and reinterpretations of it have different track listings.
Yeah, I
So
believe it.
I'm assuming I may have hit on some of the tracks that you are obviously familiar with and maybe on your copy, but I might have some that are not there, or I'm missing some that you have been that you
Yeah,
have on
yeah, it
your
would
copy.
probably it's different and varied. Although I would bet like newer, if there are like reissues, but who would reissue this record, right? It would be like, I'm sure it's like the complete Bend Sinister or something like
Basically, yeah.
yeah,
There's like the Bend Sinister Domesday Payoff Triad Plus,
yeah.
deluxe
Plus
edition.
plus.
Yeah. Yeah, there's like 2 disc versions, like CD versions, and they have like basically everything from this era. So but so basically I was going down the Bend Sinister uh track listing.
All right. So does that have both versions of shoulder pads?
It has 1 and 2.
Yeah,
I also heard the 1B version.
Oh, so yeah, so that beats me.
Yeah,
Didn't even
that
know
was
there
an
was another
extra.
one.
Yeah.
But just
Just
the
look
I
at it.
so the fact that like so on the Domesday Triad record, like there's the A side, and right in the middle of it is Shoulder Pads version 1. This bizarre, catchy, like, but also like, I mean, I knew nothing about like krautrock and Noi and stuff, so like, there's no way for me to put together like, oh, this is this odd, catchy little melody on top of this. There was nothing connected for me to that like drony, like chugging sound. It was just like, this is so cool. And then to do it again on the second side of the record to be like, and here we are again. It's like, really? Okay, cool. You could do that.
Yeah. Well, there's something weird about the fall, right? Because like I'm a nominal fan. I basically was introduced to This Nation's Saving Grace around 24, and that's pretty much where I stayed. I was just like I tried listening to some of the other records at some other points, and it was just like it's not This Nation's Saving Grace. It's so catchy and like kind of like hooky, has so much like kind of upbeat rhythms that it's like it's just a fun record. And but what I'm realizing is that a lot of their records, almost all of their records, are like that almost, where it's like there's this uncanny thing where the band lineup, the group lineup has changed so often and so many times, and there's been so many different people in the band at different times in their career, but they still manage to kind of hold on to this similarity, and even in sound, even like the instrumentation, the tones are similar to each other, so much so that it's just like, if I didn't know, and I didn't know up until just this past week, that the band had changed so often, that it's just like I would have never known that it changed at all.
That's interesting because I hear them in such chunks, and I don't know that my chunks necessarily line up with exactly sort of a canonical like understanding of how things are changing big time. But I do think that like This Nation's Saving Grace and this record are at this sort of peak of catchiness. I think a lot of the times that's in part at least attributed to the Brick Smith influence, right? That he this new band member comes on, they get married, she has a strong influence on him. Some people I have become aware of, although I don't know how exaggerated this is, some people felt like she was a terrible influence on their music and ruined the band.
Sure, the
I do not feel
purists.
that way. I think that, but I do hear like kind of bubblegummy, catchy, poppy things coming into the band at that point that I love,
Yeah,
that I think are great, and they're in there with like a kind of swagger that also is like, I think grows in power from the kind of relentless, like weird shambly droney chug from early records. I could tell, I feel like I'm like, I know when it's the mid 80s, even if you found like some outtake I didn't know, I'd be like, I know when this is from.
yeah, weird. But yeah, I just thought that was so strange. And then also like the well, first of all, I was going to ask you a little earlier when you were mentioning it. Have you ever had the opportunity to meet Mark Smith?
um I not to have a conversation with. I did I got to, I ate ate a meal at the table next to him and nodded
Oh,
at him once
oh
in
yeah.
Croatia. Yeah.
Wow, in Croatia, weird. Did it just you didn't have the courage to kind of like bother him at his meal?
Didn't feel like the right opportunity. It was at a
Right.
festival that both our bands were playing at, and he was rumored to not be in great shape at that time.
What year was this?
Not that long ago.
Oh, okay.
Maybe 7 or 8 years ago.
Okay.
um 8 to 10 years ago, that within the last decade. um and he was eating at a table with this woman, and it was just the two of them, and I was like,
Not
I
the
would
time.
love to meet this guy, and but I, like,
Yeah.
I'm not sure what I would have gotten out of it anyway, other than like, I met Marky Smith.
Right.
Like, I don't think he never struck me as the kind of guy who wanted to hear my story about him.
Certainly not over dinner.
Yeah.
Not a great time to approach him. I had a similar thing actually. I kind of had a similar distance to Jonathan Richman, and I was like just sitting next to him eating. I was just like, I would love
Yeah.
to say something to this guy, but I just know it's not going to go over well.
I have a really good job. I have had an in-depth conversation with Jonathan Richman that I
Oh,
could share
really?
with you at some point. Yeah,
Okay.
there's a real story about Jonathan. Big argument backstage between Jonathan and me.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, I guess we'll have to talk about that later.
Part two, episode
Unfortunately, you didn't
two.
choose. He didn't choose a Modern
By the
Lovers.
way, it absolutely occurred to me to select the first Modern Lovers record as my choice for this interview, because
And
that record is deeply, profoundly important to me,
okay, yeah, sure.
to the
And
point
then you
where
could have shared that story.
I know. 2 summers ago, my wife and I and a couple friends learned the whole record note for note and played it on our back porch here in the city of Boston. Just played the whole record. Got some friends to come in and sing
Yeah,
each part, and just like gave it to the neighborhood. Nobody was mad.
nice. That's great. Wow. Well, maybe next time. Maybe we'll do
Yeah,
it. We'll
another time,
revisit this. Yeah.
Me and Jonathan. Molly Ringwald looking on aghast.
Really?
Yeah,
This
this
is
is
an
my
intriguing story.
funny celeb story that you don't get on this podcast. Anyway, back to the brooding,
Well,
shadowy world of Marky Smith and the Fall.
yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. So now back to Marky Smith. I was wondering because, like, I'm curious. Like, I mean, you probably don't have any insight in this, but it's just like, his name is all over everything. He's considered the songwriter for the Fall, but at the same time, I never see him play an instrument. I think I've seen one video clip of him live somewhere with a guitar on once, and I didn't even
Yeah,
see him playing it. And then it's just like so, and then you hear these interviews with the former band members where they'll say, "Oh, somebody brings a song in, or the whole group writes it together." It's like, well, so where does like how involved was he in the songwriting of all of this material? He's the only original member. He's the only member that's he is the Fall essentially.
yes,
But
yeah, absolutely.
how does the music get written? Like how does like why what is
Well,
his involvement minus
I
the
mean,
lyrics?
like, yeah, you could parse that for details, but there's, ultimately the Fall's a rock band. Like, and I mean
Hmm.
that in a really like, um, positive way, but that where like the energy and identity of who they are and what they're doing like requires vision and commitment. And his vision and commitment was such that like people couldn't stand working with him. He was abusive to people, extremely difficult to work with, but also like had some kind of ability to shepherd this entity, right? This band, The Fall, like is his vision. And it didn't start that way, right? And some of the earliest members, I guess, left because they were like, this was supposed to be collective and collaborative. And long history, like with how much did he steal from his wife at the time, right? I'm not here to sort of justify like bad interpersonal behavior, but you said yourself before, like you could listen to your experiences, you can listen to this stuff from all different eras, and it hangs together, whether you feel like it's indistinguishable or it's later stuff is an evolution of earlier stuff. Like it hangs together as a vision, and there's something kind of mystical and mysterious in that, which is it sounds sort of banal to talk about it that way, but you look at James Brown or Neil Young, or as a band, another fantastic example would be Pere Ubu, a band that has existed for decades through all kinds of membership and membership changes, and the universal constant is David Thomas, who doesn't, well, I guess he played some clarinet back at the start of it, but like he's not an instrument player guy. And it's like, what is it that makes it their bands? I don't know, but like if you have the chance to go see Pere Ubu, you go, and it's always amazing, always amazing. And like same thing with The Fall. Like I didn't purchase every single Fall record through the last 2 decades, but I made sure to listen to them, and the ones that I really liked I made sure to get. Like I said, The Unutterable is like in my top 3 or 4 Fall records. And what is it? I don't know. I don't think I have the ability to break that down, because I do think there's an ineffable piece to the stuff that touches me most deeply. And I feel his presence and personality in every iteration of the band. And why that is, I can't say. Like that may just be what charisma is, I don't know, but I get it off a piece of plastic.
Well, so your relationship like with your band is way different than Marky Smith's relationship with his group.
Yes, completely.
I mean,
yes. No, my God, The Fall is certainly not like a model for sustained creativity to me. Like for me, who I am.
Right. But even still, like Oneida, I mean, I have your new record. This one.
Awesome. It's a good one. People should get that.
It is a good record. It is an amazing record. I really like. I listened. I talked to John briefly at your show in Cambridge, and I was just like, John, I heard like I think 15 seconds of like the music video for the first single, and I was just like, I got to get that record, and I like went out and I ordered it immediately. So and then it hasn't disappointed. I mean, I put it on when I got it home, and it's just a great solid record, I think. So seeing you guys live, looking through the record, there's very little artwork on the inside, like on the sleeve. It's kind of just like very brief touchstone information stuff, but it doesn't seem like everything is kind of credited to the band. Nothing is credited to any individual. So it seems like you guys kind of like write kind of together.
Well, sometimes, or sometimes a song will come in like pretty fully formed from one person, but part of who we are and how we want to maintain an ongoing, productive, creative relationship is as a collaborative organization. So like, even if one person comes in with a song written and we all just kind of put it together, it's still we credit everything to all of us who participate in the record. And that allows us to feel pretty free, I think, in terms of different writing processes. Like it's sort of like, well, whatever we do, everybody matters, right? So like, for instance, if somebody brings in a song and is like, here's the song, here's the lyrics, here's here's a melody, here's a demo recording, let's go. That song is going to undergo a process of transformation because it's getting played by us.
Right.
But there might be songs where like, oh, somebody else plays the guitar or the bass, or somebody, uh, like just had a different kind of vision, and it still gets credited to everybody. And our processes have varied so much through the years. We've been a band for a long time. We've made records in a lot of different ways, super collaboratively. Sometimes much more like generated by one. It's like one vector coming into the band is like, boom, here's this stuff and this idea, let's go, and it's like, cool, we'll follow that vision. But because we want to be sustainable, we view it as a collaborative process that just sometimes has different, like, there's different like pressures and motivating energy.
Yeah. Okay. But and also a mutual respect and admiration for each other, I'm sure, because at that show it was packed, it was crazy, the little lily pads venue. And I happened to be close enough to the stage where just before you guys performed, I saw you guys do your group huddle, maybe prayer thing that you do. Yeah. And I was just like, this is a band that loves one another. This is great.
Yeah, that is true. And that has become an important part of who we are to us. One of the nice things about like staying together for a long time is you have to find ways to maintain that relationship even when things are frustrating, right? Because in every relationship things get frustrating or things get difficult, or you create patterns that ultimately like magnify things that are otherwise like little, right? It's like, but you patterns of behavior and patterns of interaction, like once you do that long enough, you're like, oh, we're just magnifying some little thing that's annoying, like that's bullshit, like let's move past it. And it's like you gain that confidence that your relationship and the enduring nature of it matters more than like whatever a bump is. So because we've done this, the new guy in the band is Shaheen, who's only been in the band since like 2006, right? So it's like 16 years, a long time.
Yeah.
There's a confidence in how you're going to interact and be with people, and that can help people if it's like, shit, were my contributions like really like crucial here? And it's like, well, we're in this relationship, like, yeah, they are.
Right. Okay. We'll get more into that maybe in a little while. I'd like to get through some of this record. Right. Oh yeah, we have an agenda. Yeah, I mean, I was going to skip around a little bit anyway, considering I didn't even know what track listing I was definitely going to go down.
Cool.
But let's go ahead and get into it a little bit. Let's start off with the first song that it's on my track listing is ROD.
That's the first song on yours?
It is, yeah.
Interesting.
Wow. So what's yours? Is that
that's the fourth song on the second side on my record?
See, is there a ghost in my house? Is that the first track on yours?
Yeah, there's a ghost in my house.
God damn it. I put these both track listings next to one another, and I was just like, wait, is this the one or is this the one? I was just like, I think maybe this is going to be the one. But either way, we're gonna tackle some of the same songs. Obviously,
yeah. No, and I'm not. We could go at it from any angle you want.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of customary to the fall, right? It's kind of madness. It's kind of
exactly. It's like it's imperfect and jumbled, even like when it's not. If that makes sense,
and it can still work. It doesn't matter.
Oh yeah. Might not. Let's try.
Yeah. But so ROD, sometimes referred to as Realm of Dusk. I don't know if you knew that what ROD stood for.
Well, I know that. I mean, that's a line in the song, but I guess I never actually
put that together. Yeah, but I don't know what Realm of Dusk really means. I mean, so I read this interview with Mark saying the quote from him says that the lyrics are about approaching the mediocre. So with that being said, if you look at the lyrics and kind of like start reading them and then trying to interpret them, you're essentially saying, well, this is just word salad. Like none of this really matters because you're just trying to fill in these gaps with melody more so than trying to convey a story or, make a point.
yeah, I mean, I see, I experience I experience his lyrics as word not quite word salad, but more like more like
Subconscious.
expressionist, more like an expressionist experience. And they're right, it's music, so the words are sound to
Yeah.
me.
Okay.
And um you know, language is interesting. This is one of the things that I love most about the fall, right? Language is a communication tool. um and it begins, like, historically, it begins, if you look back at, like, you know, early linguistic development, right, it's sound before it's like anything written
Hmm.
or signifying. And I experience lyrics as sound, and then, like, the meaning kind of reaches out of those sounds. So certain songs that I know really well and I could actually, like, sing along with the lyrics, I don't think about the lyrics. And then other ones, it's like there are lyrical moments that are really, really, really important to me.
Yeah.
But it's, I have learned, and I've learned in writing my own songs and lyrics and singing a lot, that, like, it's really funny and surprising sometimes how people interpret what you've written. So I've learned to really, really let go from the creating end.
Mm.
You know, I'm like, okay, I put this out here, however it connects with you or works with you, is like, that is it's a personal experience between you and the words that I put out there. And I feel really empowered to have that, like, same relationship with the fall, which is why, like, before I said it, you know, like, I don't tend to visit the annotated fall
Yeah.
uh
Yeah.
you know, lyrics. Like, when I think of ROD, I think of this kind of, like, there's some, like, really, like, horrifying, like, gross imagery in it. And like
Mm.
there's some big gross thing, right? It starts with it's approaching.
Right.
and
Yeah.
then and then there's some stuff about, like, the North, right? And he's always talking about the North.
Right.
It's everywhere because he's from the north of England, but is that always what he's talking about? I don't fucking know.
Right.
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 But the idea of, like, hiding in the dark and in the shadows, and, like, the sun never shines, really sounds to me like that just feels like northern England to me. But, like, what is his purpose of this kind of horrifying, hovering, devouring image, and the idea of people, like, living in darkness and not showing their faces to the sun? I don't know, but it's a good gloomy ass set of sounds that goes with the song, right? It,
Yeah.
like, seeps into you and maybe doesn't make you feel great. I feel a little
Yeah.
nauseous.
Yeah. I can see that definitely, but and that's, like, I'm saying that it's all into interpretation, and I like your interpretation of it. I can dig that.
Yeah,
Um.
well, it's funny. I'm not a like a let's lay this out, and, like, I'm not a precise. I'm not into precision.
Sure. Well, there is no person, there
Yeah.
is no precision for this, really, and that's the beauty of lyrics, as you were saying. It's interpretation, right? It's interpretational for everybody. Everybody
Yeah.
has their own takeaway from it, and that's a beautiful thing, really, for that art form. um, let's move on to my next song, Dr. Faustus.
Yeah.
Now, I imagine you might have something to say about this. I really don't, because I am not very good with literature,
Well, you know
and
what's
this
funny about that song is that song is actually not on the
your
record that I
copy.
grew up with.
God damn
I
it.
know it pretty. I mean, I own, like,
Other
Bend
copies.
Sinister.
Okay.
Um, you know, but, like, that's something I got, like, way late in life. It was like, oh, I should get this. You know, I should get this record, like the actual album.
Right. Yeah.
But
Okay.
yeah,
So
oh my God, no, I don't know what the hell he's talking about. I mean, like, again, there's more, like, violent, disturbing, disgusting imagery in there.
right. Well,
Um,
because it seems like the steady through line is the connection to Faust.
sure, right.
So
Probably. On the other hand, he was, like, writing, like, plays and operas and stuff at this time.
hmm,
And my understanding is, like, Hey Luciani, and maybe that song, I don't know, are part of some opera or ballet he was doing. That, he had wild, ambitious
Right.
visions.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
that like, and then I know a couple of years later there's I Am Curious Orange, which is also like a ballet. That's what that record is. And I'm like, I love that this is true, but
Yeah.
I am I'm in love with the rock band.
Right.
And
Okay.
I'm very psyched if high culture and literature and history are all colliding to make this happen. But for me, there's a sensational, like a sensory experience that is way more important. And
Mm.
again, so Dr. Faustus like is not a song that to me is part of this sort of adolescent, I'm 15, what the hell am I experiencing part
Okay.
of this record.
All right. Yeah, and it's just weird. I mean, like it's got a lot of literary connections to it, which I'm just not familiar with, and I kind of didn't even want to get into because I was like, I don't want to have to read a book just to kind of talk about this one
Right,
song.
right, exactly. And it's, maybe it would be, I feel like it would be perfectly reasonable if that were the kind of relationship I had with the fall and with the lyrics. But
Hmm.
it is not. It's
Yeah,
really an energy based relationship and
sure.
a sound based relationship,
Right,
both
and
in the
because you
words
have
and the music.
history too, because you've been listening to this for
Yeah,
decades, and you have
yeah,
a kind of connection to it more so than coming into it as like a novice, being like, okay, well, what's going on here? Let me try to understand and analyze this. It's a totally different
totally. And
interpretation.
it's like I get lost in fall songs and in Marky Smith's lyrical worlds. And every song is its own world, right? It's not like he
Hmm.
has this massive like through line vision that I experience. It's like every song is its own world. And I get caught up and lost in it and like dislocated and turned around. And, I don't really want the signposts.
Hmm.
I also
Yeah.
like going hiking in the woods and, like not taking out my map until it's like, shit, it's going to get dark and I'm in trouble. Right. It's like, I like to be lost. And boy, is
Yeah.
his music a
The
place to
adventure,
be
the
lost.
adventure of kind of like getting lost in something, try to find
Yeah.
your
And
way
like
out.
a sense of powerlessness.
Hmm.
Like in the music that I want, yeah, being lost is important and being like, you're not in control
Mm.
sometimes.
You're
And
taking a
like,
ride.
yeah, you go see a great show, if that music takes you away, like suddenly you have abdicated your control of the situation. And that's true if you're jumping around in a mosh pit when you're younger, or it's true if you're, just completely absorbed and zoned out into somebody's drone, or,
Hmm.
I know people have that experience at Grateful Dead shows. I tried that a couple times. I didn't have the same experience there.
Right.
But like I love it. I love that it works for people, right? That completely transported can happen in a lot of ways and look really different. But the idea being that like you are not in control. You surrender to something and you allow yourself to be, manipulated by that.
Yeah. Okay. I love that because I do. It's been a long time since I've had that experience, but I know what that is, and
Yeah.
like it's definitely a special thing.
Harder to come by the older you get.
I
The
guess
more you
so.
the more you like have built your foundations and your structures of like your world and reality. It's
Right.
a
Yeah.
much bigger commitment to dismantle those things.
I know, man. That sucks. Sucks getting old. All right. Look, there's only a couple more like things I'd really like to touch on. I was gonna like I have some questions for some other songs, but I'm just like these aren't really that important. There's some that are I think are particularly interesting, like Gross Chapel, British Grenadiers,
Yeah.
Grenadiers. Is that how you pronounce that?
Grenadiers. Yep.
Grenadiers. Um, so I don't have too much to say about that song. It seems kind of like stymied in history. Uh, but there's something interesting that happens in the music, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with this. Did you like did you want to hear a clip of this song and like where it kind of gets weird?
Well, sure. I'm curious to know yeah, sure, what you're hearing or noticing on.
Well, it was mentioned in the an annotated fall. So it's essentially that that hook that you hear, right?
Uh-huh.
But so someone on that website said that they're the parts where it seems to go out of time. have been described as mistakes by some, but players this season wouldn't be accidentally dropping or adding beats. At the top of verse 2, the rhythm guitar hits the changes a half beat ahead for 4 bars, at the end of which Hanley throws in a note a whole beat ahead, and Wollstonecraft responds by doing his next set of accents a beat behind, and they lock back in
Yeah, I
as
mean,
if like nothing happens.
but okay, so all right, so first of all, I play in Oneida. I play primarily keyboard instruments, and I play a lot of bass.
Yeah.
Um, and Stephen Hanley is one of my all-time favorite bass players.
Okay.
I think the way he plays, like, got into my brain and my blood a long time ago, and I'm like really familiar. So you just played that, and that's exactly what I was listening to. Um, they're just playing, and they know how to play together.
So even
Um,
though somebody falls off, they just manage to kind of lock back
yeah,
in
they're just
eventually.
playing. Yeah, that's just music, right? And it's like everything that I love, it's elastic.
Right.
uh
But I
you know,
mean, it's
I
it's
don't
weird
I
that
don't hear I don't imagine that there's some sort of scripted sense of you change here. I believe fully that, like, when they play this, they're not really giving a crap about precision, and they know how to play together.
right, but that leads to the question of this, like when you're in a recording session, like when do you decide, oh, that wasn't a good take, do it again, guys? Like you guys fell off, you fucked up something, you fell off time or so or whatever.
I think that
But
depends on the band, and in this case, I think it's probably like if
right,
how the man himself feels about it would be my
exactly.
guess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But so I was wondering for you. So can you think of any oddities that presented themselves in Oneida songs that were either premeditated or happy accidents?
Oh yeah, constantly. I mean, sure. Like, I mean, that's like
All the
every
time?
song.
Every
Yeah. Well, so at least for us, so talking about Oneida's process, right? Because I'm not qualified to talk about the process of the fall for
Sure, yeah,
sure.
yeah, for
But
you.
like, our process is to, it, like I said before, it really varies from what is it like. We may have the most vague set of self directions, right? Let's try this, and then we kind of go at it, and we're like, oops, that was a terrible idea. Or, well, what if we tweak it this way? Or we may have like a song that has changes. um
Right.
but I'll give you a concrete example. So we
Okay.
just played uh 2 shows in December. It's now early January, right? We played 2 shows in December, one of which you were at in Cambridge, Mass.
Mm-hmm.
The other one was out in Western Massachusetts in a town called Greenfield. um we wrote 2 songs ahead of time, and I live in Boston and the rest of the band lives in New York. So I put together these 2 song demos, um and sent them to those guys. I mean, sent a bunch of stuff, and we kind of have a big pool of ideas that we're picking from. We were like, all right, let's work on these 2 songs,
Yeah.
and let's play them in Greenfield and Cambridge. We're not going to have a chance to get together and ever play them together as a band before we get on stage, but the rest of the guys met and kind of worked through some versions of the song. We sort of talked about it, and we jumped up on stage, and like, I felt pretty comfortable that I knew kind of the way these other 4 people were going to approach this song, and they felt pretty confident that I would be able to sing it and play it along with them. And there was actually 2 of these songs. One of them, like, when we went to play together, it was like, oh yeah, this is exactly what we thought, right? This is boom, we hit every little change. Or maybe it was like somebody like stayed in the same place while everybody else went somewhere else, and it's like, cool, we caught up. But like, boom, perfect dovetailing as far as we're concerned, right?
Right.
And that's how we, like, learn and build a song. Like, what if those things, it's like, oh yeah, it was kind of cool, you like stayed at that part and we changed, and then you came around. Like, do it that way. um
Mm-hmm.
the other song was one that kind of got slightly, like, off in terms of who was going to be where. And that was the first night in Greenfield. That was kind of awesome. And it turns out this song can work um almost with like overlapping modules.
Mm-hmm.
um like, if I'm playing, and it was just because like the way I'm playing the bass and singing it is like personalized enough that it's going to be elastic from time to time, but you know, the bandmates who have like kind of figured out a way they want to approach the song have kind of figured it out according to another set of strictures, then you lay one over the other. And if I'm like, well, fuck this, instead of playing this here, I'm going to change here. And it's like, well, they're not expecting that, but it sounds great. And I'm sure when the time comes, you know, we'll keep playing these songs live, and at some point we'll record them, probably, I would guess, in the summer, you know, after we've had a chance to maybe get together actually in a more controlled environment and work through some of the oddities. But it's going to reflect the way those two visions of the song kind of came together. I mean, one of the things that it's lucky that we figured out right before is we actually played it in different keys. We actually heard like the key center differently. Would it have been interesting to play it that way? Yes, it would. We didn't do that. But so that's I mean, that's a constant, because if you're playing music, you know, like it can be awesome. It doesn't have to be like following a script. It's why I think notated music is taken way too seriously by people who play, you know, strictly notated music. Is like that's a problem, because like notation is very useful right, as a roadmap, but if you're not willing to diverge from what somebody else wrote down, like you're not going to get somewhere different with it. You know, now that we have recording technology and AI and MIDI, like, you know, if the notes are what interests you, we'll just like put the notes into a computer and there it is, you know. I mean, that's one extreme of it for sure.
Yeah, and it can happen though. It's
sure,
being
of
done.
course. Yeah. But you know, that just isn't interesting to me, like at all.
I understand. I hear you, man. All right, well, let's move on to the next few songs. I've got maybe 3 more for you.
Sure.
Living Too Late. I know it's probably not on your list.
that one is also not. I know I love that song, but that is also not on the Domesday Triad record.
Okay. Well, so listening to Living Too Late, I mean, in hindsight, it seems to be prophetical, like we were kind of talking about and with Mark's ability to you know, create lyrics. But I think at the time of its conception, you know, in these like kind of mid 80s, the lyrics could be portrayed as a man that is coming to grips with the idea that he is no longer a young man and has lived a bit too hard for too long. Are you a sober person now?
I'm not a sober person.
Okay, neither am I.
But I'm you know, I mean, well, I am right now in the month of January. That's an annual tradition in our house.
Yeah.
It's like the head check.
Well, because I mean, because Mark was notorious for being an alcoholic, essentially, and you know, it showed on his face, and that's kind of like what he mentions in the song. You know, it's like the crow's feet on his eyes.
Yeah.
Right?
But
and,
that's I mean, but that's also yeah. Yeah, I don't know that I have ever associated that with like substance abuse.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more. I hear that song. I hear that song more as from the perspective or the voice of somebody who is like living in a world that doesn't match their own kind of the way they want to relate to the world, right? The way that like entropy or technology or development has removed humanity. It's sort of like it's like a natural outcome of you live in a place of like something magical, or there's like a world that you understand has passed, and you're still around. Like, what does that mean? And it's a pretty, you know, it's like a bleak reality, but it's also like a way of confronting a reality. Like,
is that like survivorship guilt, like you're talking about, kind
of? Yeah, I don't know that guilt is the right word, and this is part of why I think it's a cool song and a cool
that's
way of
that
writing
term.
it. It's, you know, no, I hear you, but it's more like it's more like confronting like time, I think.
Hmm.
Right. We experience time as humans, we're limited, so we experience it as a linear thing,
Right.
right? Like a capable scientist can quickly, you know, explain to you like time is actually not linear. This is a fault of our set of perceptions, right? But like whatever, we
Hmm.
experience it that way. And you really have a choice if you come from a romantic, like big R romantic mindset, right? Of believing that the individual has a powerful role in the universe, and that like your perceptions and your understanding of the universe are ineffable and inexpressible fully to anyone else. Like, well, what happens when your connection with that world dries up? And here you're still there. So, in
Right.
a true romantic conception, that's the like live fast, die young, like go out in a blaze of glory. But okay, so what if not?
Right.
Right. And like not as a like my body is growing old, but like the things that have connected me to the world are no longer visible to me. And I understand it's like a more material,
Yeah.
hard thing that surrounds me.
Well, like you were talking about, like getting the lost in music at a live show.
Yeah,
It's like it's harder the older you get
there
because
you
you've
go.
lost the
Go,
connection to the magic.
sure, go see a show and be like, fuck, I'm old. I can't surrender the way that I did before.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So then what do you do? Do you like doom yourself to, you know, do you disappear immediately? Or
Right.
do
I mean,
you
what do you do? You have to
live
carry
in
on.
a
You have to live and
compromise
you have to live until you
denouement?
die, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you just deal with what you're given and be thankful for being alive because I mean, I think most people will enjoy that they have this life that they're living, however they're living it. But
Well,
the
and if
older
you
you
don't
get,
enjoy it or you enjoy it significantly less, is there still meaning in being connected to the world? I think
right.
I think that's that's where I would land. I really like that song.
Yeah, losing connection. I think maybe that's what we're at. Like
Yeah.
like as the older you get, if you're kind of disconnected with what reality is or kind of the way you see things, your perception of things, you living too late is kind of like I'm losing connection with reality. Like I can't.
Well, in earlier worlds are more magical,
Yeah.
right? That's just a thing. There's like I recently visited within the past few years, um before they took it down, the MFA in Boston had an exhibit on the modern moment.
Hmm.
And it was like one of the things that somebody had written an essay, and it was just a little collection in their American wing. One of the things that somebody had written about it that was in this exhibition like really landed super hard for me, because it got me to think about the moment of electrification and electric light, which really came into very quick, right, widespread use in the first decade of the 20th century. And
Hmm.
that is this moment, right? The modern moment is like up there through like the First World War and what comes after. It was like this insane acceleration of like, oh, now everything's lit up, all the
Right.
streets,
Yeah.
right? And in some ways, that's really exciting. It's first of all, it's practically useful,
Right.
and in other ways, it's super exciting, which you still see in people, talking about like, oh, Broadway, the Great White Way, right? The idea that like things are glittering.
Hmm.
Um, but holy crap, right? Like there's also like the loss of magic and unknown and mystery. And like if you look at life and the world on a practical standpoint, you're talking about the disappearance of superstition and other things that have made human life objectively shittier, right?
Right.
And the advent of science and scientific progress, which
Right.
objectively have improved, human existence in so many ways.
Sure.
Um, but I think it's also compelling to think about and allow yourself to acknowledge like the losses that came with those gains,
Hmm.
right? Like the
Okay.
more you dispel the shadows, the less you like feel what might be in those shadows, right?
Right.
Boom, light everything up. Oh, it's fine.
Right. There's no more creativity. There's no more
I mean,
magic.
and
It's
I
just
think there
everything.
always is, but there is like a
Right, but it's the interpretation. You can't see it as clearly, or at least like it's
yeah,
diminished because of what you have visible to you in your like kind of immediate foresight.
yeah. And
Yeah,
I hear some of that since we're talking about it.
yeah, yeah.
That's kind of what I hear um in Living Too Late, and maybe some other stuff too.
All right, two more for you. I'd like to cover Bournemouth Runner.
Yeah. it, it's quite interesting. You're picking almost all the songs that were
That
removed from Bend Sinister. I also love that one. That's one where like so literally the chorus line, pops into my head like kind of randomly.
yeah. Okay. Oh well, so the short story is essentially the song derives from a wild stunt where the band was performing, and a longtime fan from Bournemouth had jumped on stage and run off with the band's banner. So that's the gist of what the song is kind of about. So what is the one of the most wild things you can think of that happened at an Oneida show?
um of created by others or created by us.
Whatever you think.
I mean, okay,
Whatever
so
is not incriminating and whatever
so
is.
here's a story about ecstasy, not the substance, the human experience.
Mhm.
For a number of years, as we toured through the South, we would always play in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, at an old warehouse that had been turned into a sort of a venue in a community space. There's a big kitchen. They call it the
Mhm.
warehouse with WHERE. So there's people who've been around in the 90s and early 2000s in that area. They may be like, yeah, duh, the warehouse. Um,
Okay.
and a lot of that was a place where we felt really, really at home.
Mhm.
We made sure to always play there. We had good friends who ran the joint. People were still close to and connected with. And it was always a place where we felt like we could not be like a safe space to kind of go all
Sure.
in a lot of ways. And well, one part of it is toward the end of it. I remember just in the middle of some improvisational exploration, sort of attempting something without thinking about it, like physically as I was playing, like what if I were doing this and then suddenly I was doing it and it was way beyond my physical capacities.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh, I'm doing this. And I remember experiencing that as like ascending. Like that's a really like key moment for me. That's not why I'm sharing this though, because later that night, as we kind of kept on going at the show, and it ended and people were kind of like banging and pounding, and it like became this sort of strange, like somewhat maybe, well, eventually very destructive kind of primal, like throbbing thudding of people pounding around, and it just kind of spread throughout the space and then to elsewhere in the warehouse, and then it was like we were smashing all the chairs in the building, like not just Oneida, although I'm sure we had some ringleader role in, but the people who lived there. It was like it was
Right.
the huge communal act of destruction with no anger or negativity associated with it at all. It was just this like, we need to continue this like rolling throb of this show, and like it just never stopped. And then it was like pounding, like people like in rhythm, like smashing chairs. And we, if in a better world we would have been like, oh my god, we're so complicit in like destroying your communal space, like we need to buy you more furniture. But instead it was like off to Atlanta or whatever. And these are people that we know and love and have a connection with, and continue to return. It wasn't like,
Yeah.
and we
Yeah.
never spoke to each other again. But I don't think I've ever really, well, I've certainly not told that story, and I certainly haven't examined that moment, in retrospect very much. It just kind of lives and lurks
Yeah.
because it's sort of an inexplicable experience. And because that was a place where those kinds of versions of who we were like came out and were allowed to come out, which meant that shows we had there were always or often really like special experiences for us, and I'll just say, and I hope for the audience, as well.
Hmm. I would imagine so. Yeah. I mean, it seems like one of those things. It's just a cathartic experience that comes through in the music that just kind of overtook everybody.
Yeah, and like how, I'm sure to an external observer it was, I mean, obviously irresponsible, but that's rock. Rock and roll is irresponsible, thank God. But
Mhm.
I'm sure it would have looked destructive in a negative way, but that I certainly not how I experienced it or remembered it at the time, believed it to be at the time. Looking back, and I don't think other people experience it that way. I think it was just, yeah, like catharsis, or I don't know, some sort of like communal, like an inexplicable moment, like a
Right.
really inexplicable thing.
Hmm.
Why? I have no idea, because we all surrendered to something that was like beyond what we like, was easily describable.
Yeah. Like, it would be so socially like acceptable.
Yeah, yeah. And we
Right.
were doing all that together. We were just outside that together. I know it's funny because it's not a very like rock and roll moment, It's
Kind of
it's more
is.
of a like,
Yeah.
I mean it is in the giving up, like, or not, moving beyond the bounds of propriety, I'm sure. But like, yeah, it's a little bit more of a culty communal moment, maybe. I don't know.
That's okay.
It is
That's
what it
okay.
is. People can interpret and analyze that all they want.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, here's the last thing for you. So let's end this at US 80s through 90s.
Yes.
All right.
US
So
80s, 90s. That's another phrase that like I just hear in my phrase, along with like he was a Bournemouth runner. There's a, like the hook, the lyrical hook of that song fits
right.
perfectly in my brain and my my consciousness.
Yeah, I mean it's a great song. It's kind of borders on hip hop. It kind of starts off with that like drum like that drum machine beat, you know. Um so now there's a line in the song that goes the cops are the tops,
Yeah, yeah, totally.
which I take as satire kind of around the whole this New York cops pro police slogan from the 60s.
Yeah, well, I think he names Boston like right at the so let's own this. I believe he names Boston right at the start of the song.
Right. Yeah, he does. And then, I guess that has something to do with like a little bit of their history, like kind of, touring in the United States and kind of flying into Boston and getting harassed by the TSA, I guess, like for having cigarettes and booze or something on them or something like that.
Yeah, that's in there, right? It's like
Yeah.
or it's about yeah, no beer. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, but again, it's like here's his ability to not necessarily see the future, but to make music about the kinds of themes and threads that are going to pop up again in the future, right? Like this makes
Mm.
sense for him being like fuck the cops and fuck the rules and fuck the uptightness and the boundaries and strictures.
Hmm.
And like he's not wrong that the US compared to his life in Europe is like much more obsessed with control of the population. It's like we have our nice mythology of freedom in our past, but like it's really a society of control compared to what we think we are.
Right. Where we used to be, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, like maybe, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't, then
It all
it's like
depends on
you
your
look back and you're like,
perception.
oh yeah, and it depends on who you're talking about too,
Sure.
right? It's like,
Sure.
oh yeah, shit was real free for some people, right? But we're a society of control, and I think he calls it out really well there. And he's looking at the future, right? He's singing this in the mid 80s, the late 80s, and he's like, here's the US in the 80s and 90s,
Right. Right.
right? He's like here's where you are. And I think I hear the song as like he's in the US at the moment, right? It's like this
Hmm.
is this
Yeah.
is the deal. Welcome to the
Right.
US 80s, 90s. This is the deal. um yeah, great. But the fact that like that phrase lands for me, right, and sticks in my head is a prime example of something we were talking about a while ago, that it's like sound and like phrases are where I find the meaning in his music the most. And
Sure.
sometimes it's these like this is the era where it's like it's often that like chorus phrase or that title phrase. Other
Hmm.
songs it'll be like a phrase from just somewhere way in the song floats up and lives, in my brain as the song.
Right,
Uh,
right.
but here it's like very hooky.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
like you said, great rhythm, great like breaks in it,
Hmm.
fantastic bass playing as always.
Yeah, yeah. But now, so about the phrase, the cops are tops, obviously it's kind of a satirical take. Um, so speaking of satire, what's the deal with success?
Oh. um so obviously there's some humor in that title.
Yeah.
Um, but it's also like so a little bit of a, I don't know if this is a stock phrase, but a way that I have of kind of encapsulating something about Oneida in general, and I think this fits it very well, is like it's funny, but it's not a joke.
Hmm.
Um, and like there has to be some humor and some self-deprecating humor and some dark humor in being a band for 25 years and be like success.
Hmm.
Um, you know, but there's also an earnestness at the same time to that like this is a success, right? Like we
Right.
can look at who we are and what we've done, and it's not been a predictable path, but like I feel like being a band as long as we are and making music that I think is really great. Like I feel really, really happy about Oneida and Oneida's music through the years. I think there's a little bit of a there's like sincerity in calling a record success, but it also forces you to have to think about it on a level of humor, but also on a like, okay, well, what can this mean? What are the possibilities here? And so like I would like to have my cake and eat it too. In that,
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
like if you think it's not funny, well then I get to be like, well, it's funny. And if you think it's funny, then I say, well, it's not a joke, it's real.
Well, I think that it's funny in a way because, like I said, it's a great record. Like it immediately grabbed me. And I think that the idea of calling an album success as a title, there's meaning behind using that word. And I think that whether you meant it or not, you put out an amazing record that should be a success. I
Right.
mean, like in every aspect of the
Totally agree.
world of music industry standards, it should be a success.
Right. We're just manifesting here.
Exactly.
It begins
Yeah.
with the word and it becomes the reality.
Yeah.
Um yeah, well, and I mean, and also there's obviously like some tongue-in-cheek aspect to the fact that we've made a bunch of pretty uh I think for some people challenging records
Yeah.
in
Sure.
the years preceding this. And this is a very accessible record
Hmm.
by our standards. I know our perspective is sort of skewed, but we're making pop songs here. Like,
Yeah. Right.
so we should acknowledge and celebrate that, like, that maybe a little tongue in cheek, but also like, well, this is what that looks like and sounds like for us. But we
Right.
recognize that that isn't the same that it necessarily looks like and sounds like for
The public.
most people.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, like it's wild. I mean, for people either just coming into Oneida's world, I think this is a great starting point, and they can go back obviously and kind of like explore the more experimental and challenging albums. And the other idea is that it's 25 years. You've put out how many records? 20,
A lot. I have no
13.
idea.
But like there's a huge discography, and
Yeah,
so
there is
there's a lot for
there is
people
an
to mine.
impenetrable discography.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
oh yeah, these four only came out on cassette.
You can find
Sorry.
them digitally somewhere, I'm sure. You can like
You
scour
can now.
YouTube or
You can now.
something.
We made them available digitally during the pandemic. We
There
had
you
a
go.
series of cassettes from 2015, 14, and 15 and 16 that we were like, we're not really doing a whole lot right now. Let's make these available to people.
Right, right. And that's great. See, so I mean, like I think that there should be something uh said about that. I mean, like, I understand a little bit of irony in it and all, but I do wish you the most success possible for this record. I hope that it's doing well. I know it's been out for quite a while now.
Yeah, I don't really know how one measures that. How does a record, what does it look like for a record to do well
Well,
in
I don't know.
2022, 2023? Like I don't know.
Right.
But we feel like really proud of the record, and we're playing songs from it, and they continue to sort of work and to land right for us and to feel like they kind of communicate who we are successfully. And they've led us to new stuff. Like I was saying before, we're also, it's like constantly there's new stuff coming that is sort of informed and influenced by that. So,
Yeah.
who
Okay.
knows what the next record will be, but hopefully we get it together a little
Right.
quicker.
Yeah. Well, maybe. So what is the plan anyway? I mean, I think I saw something about a tour in the future, or is that misinformation?
So we're playing in Europe. We're touring in Europe in March.
March? Okay.
We have a show coming up in April in New York, which is just part of a little one-off. We may book a few other little shows and weekends around that, and then US tour. The plan is August, and we have some dates, and we're working out. We had to cancel part of our summer tour this past year thanks to COVID.
Oh, okay.
So we're gonna hit those cities again and add some, and hopefully kind of make our way through the Midwest and the South in August. But those plans are still a little bit in flux, so I don't have anything to announce. But that's the idea, and I
Cool.
would hope that by that point, kind of by the end of the summer, maybe the fall, we'll be working pretty hard on recording the next album, because we have enough material at this point for the next album. Although that's always a question of like, well, what are we going to record? I don't know. We'll see.
Right. You're always playing it by ear, it
But
seems.
we'll
So
do some recording. We've got a couple of things ready to roll.
cool. Well, that sounds great. Bobby, thank you very much for taking the time.
My pleasure.
This has
Thanks
been
for
wonderful.
thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And then we'll come back again sometime and talk about the Modern Lovers.
Yeah, I'm here for that. Yeah, we can. And I got the stories.
Great. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Take care of yourself.
All right, you too, Bobby. Thank you.